Final week of Lit 101, and this week we are exploring a great text, one of the most influential texts by one of the most influential people in the world, in the history of thought, the Apology of Socrates, also known as the Trial and Death of Socrates. We decided to finish the unit with this text partly because of its immense influence, the important role that it plays in literature, in philosophy, in history, in our civilization. But we also chose to finish with this text because it's one of the most profound reflections on death that you find in literature.
And can I say a third reason? There is an irresistible charm about this.
Oh, absolutely.
Book. I think Socrates is one of the, if you think of real people who have been brought to life by authors, Socrates would have to rank as one of the three most terrifically lifelike. When you read a work of Plato in which Socrates is depicted, he leaps into life in full color, in 3D. Similar, I think, to Jesus in the Gospels, similar to Dr. Johnson as depicted by Boswell in the 18th century, a character who once you've read this apology, you would recognize Socrates anywhere. So there's a huge charm and power, compelling power in the way he's depicted.
Yes, yeah, indeed. And the interesting thing about Socrates, and we've come across Socrates in this unit already, Socrates is the one who is narrating the cave allegory in, I think it was in week 5, but you'll forgive me if I can't remember the week precisely. So we've come across him before. The interesting thing about Socrates is we have no record of him writing anything down.
Same as Jesus in that regard.
Just like Jesus. And so all of the words and the wisdom of this man are found in the writings of others. And in this case, this is Plato's telling of the trial and death of Socrates. There are other tellings, Xenophon's another prominent text on this particular event. A bit of context could be helpful, though, I think, so that we can sort of understand where are we, why is Socrates standing before this jury. So in ancient Athens, the polis was made up of hundreds and hundreds of men. They met in an assembly, and then when there was a trial or just like a court trial, I suppose, then they would appoint a jury, and the jury would be made up of, in this case, it's the final vote, I think, is 280 to 220. So there's obviously a lot of people involved here. So charges would be brought, and then there would be a hearing. And this is, so charges have been brought against Socrates, and we read about those charges in the text. And then he is able to give his own account, to defend himself, to cross-examine those who are accusing him. And so that's the setting for what we see here.
Can I just comment on one detail that I find quite impressive? And again, this is just mentioned in the text, where the accuser has to get at least a third of the votes, otherwise you pay a fine.
They get a fine, yeah. It's a big fine too.
It's a great built-in way of avoiding time wasters.
Absolutely.
But anyway, you can see quite a lot of the kind of foundational structures that we would recognize today in a criminal court system. Yeah,
definitely. The fact that Socrates is able to answer the charges and so on, and defend himself. It's worth noting that this text is so rich and so influential that you can start a unit on political philosophy with the Apology of Socrates and talk about the dynamics that are evident in this text between the philosopher, the free thinker, the citizen, and then the polis, and the conflict of interest that arises there. You can start a unit on what is on the basics of philosophy with this text, and talk about the philosophical vocation, because that is also richly
the pursuit of
explored.
Truth.
Yeah. And so And then there's also, I understand it's also a text that's utilized in religious studies and in theology as well.
Yeah, it's been very influential in the history of Christian thought, especially in the attempt to think about death and what comes after death. Of course, there are other works by Plato which develop this more fully, but Socrates briefly sketches out some of the options of how to think about death and what comes next. And I would say it's been an important book in the history of Christian thought for depicting the way many ancient Christians thought about Socrates was as a kind of almost like a pagan martyr.
Yes.
It showed that it is possible, even for someone who hasn't heard about Christ or believed in him, still to be martyred for the truth in the same way that some of Christ's own followers were. So in a weird way, although Socrates was not a Christian, he was an example and inspiration for Christians as well, who in upholding their confession publicly against public opposition were also taking a stand on the side of truth and refusing to back down for the sake of public opinion. Putting the higher law first.
Yeah, above the law of the polis, above the earthly law. So you can,
and we can get back to that. That's not exactly what Socrates does, of course. He reveres the law of the city, and so much so that he's not even willing to ask them to be lenient with it. But we can come back to that.
That's good. Good to flag that. So this is all really just to say that this is such a significant and amazing text that we're looking at. But our purpose isn't to do any of those things in particular, although we might touch on some of those themes of politics, of the philosophical vocation, even on things like the immortality of the soul and of philosophy of religion and theology. But today, the question that we want to ask is, how do I live when I'm going to die? And this is something that Socrates explores in a very provocative way in his defense.
We've touched on the Epicurean understanding that death is a kind of nothing. You just cease to be, and therefore it's nothing to be afraid of. If death is just where I cease to be, dying might be unpleasant, but not death itself. You remember that discussion?
Yeah.
And interestingly, Socrates sketches out two possible ways of thinking about death. That's one of them. One possibility, he says, is death will be a kind of sleep, a sleep with no dreaming. And he even says, compared to all the other nights of your life, the richest one is the night where you sleep so deeply that you don't even dream. If you've ever worked night shifts, the deep, dreamless slumber that you have after a night shift is like that. It's a kind of annihilating bliss. And he says that's the first possibility. The second possibility is you go on living, and the other dead have gone on living too. And that would be even better. Typically for Socrates, the thing he fantasizes about is you can tell a lot about a person by how they imagine the ideal world to come. Socrates imagines being able to go and ask other people questions and find out if they really know as much as they think they know. He
wants
just
to keep doing it.
The joy that this man takes in conversing with people, the joy that the joyous curiosity that he brings to every human encounter, he just thinks, well, I could go on doing that forever. And I could find the wisest people who've ever lived and find out what they know, if they know. So in both of these scenarios, anyway, either death is nothing or death is a continuation of consciousness. And in both cases, it's something to look forward to. The point, I think, in Socrates' speech isn't so much to speculate on death. It's actually, he's actually challenging his jurors, challenging his listeners to question their assumption. The underlying assumption running throughout this whole court proceeding is that everyone is afraid to die. And Socrates actually challenges this and I imagine startled them with the spectacle of a person who is not at all afraid to die.
Is it that everyone's afraid to die, or that they're that I was wondering, the fear of death is an important theme, but I wonder if there's another layer. Is it not that there might be something more important than not dying? Like that it's not necessarily fear, but actually like this, that there's a value. He's questioning the value of one particular kind of life over another particular kind of life, which leads inevitably to death.
Yeah. And there's one part where he says, you know, you all assume that it's a horrible thing for me to be put to death, as if I would have been immortal otherwise. Socrates already understands that every human journey, every human life ends at the same point.
Yeah.
That's already decided for me.
Yeah.
So it's not a special misfortune, especially to be lamented. And I think what that means is death, the not be a driving factor that determines the way I live now.
Yeah, that's right.
It's certain that I'll die anyway.
Yes.
What are the determining factors that ought to condition the way I live now?
Right.
Truth, justice, virtue, I guess, like commitment to the public good. So a consideration of dying is a way of thinking seriously about how to make my decisions.
That's right.
Now.
That's right. For Socrates, the difference for Socrates was he was facing he was on trial for his way of life. Where that doesn't happen to most of us. Like, our way of life is not brought before a court of justice, which is going to decide whether we live or die according to how we live. Some people, that is the case. It's not the case for most of us, or any of us so far in our lives anyway. But for Socrates, it was the question that he was being asked to decide upon was, will you, like, if you are found guilty, would you go back on your way of life? And he says no, because of this higher order of values, the higher order of things that I think are important and are more valuable than simply just continuing to live. Yeah.
And he points out that in many other walks of life, we take it for granted that death is not always something to be avoided. He gives the example of a soldier in battle who could easily avoid death by throwing down his weapons and running away, but that's not right. Yes. Sometimes protecting and preserving one's life is not at all the highest priority.
Yes.
The soldier presumably has an allegiance to higher values, the good of the nation, for which he's able to. He's willing to exchange his own life for something more valuable. And in a similar way, Socrates could plead for his life, could make promises, could beg and cry, interestingly, he refers to the fact that that's normally what happens. They expect him to be full of tears and making a moving speech. You get the strong impression that they are expecting to let him off with a bit of a slap on the wrist.
Yes.
But he will have been publicly taken down a peg.
Yes.
And he'll be more more careful and circumspect. He'll be humbled in the future. And Socrates' fate is the legal proceedings escalate in a way that they probably didn't foresee, but it's brought about by the fact that Socrates has this higher allegiance and is not willing to put down his weapons and run away. He lives for truth.
Yes.
He lives for justice. He lives for wisdom.
He provokes the outcome.
Yeah,
himself.
Absolutely.
So I mean, going through the first few pages of the reading, he starts off by taking a huge stab at the rhetoricians. He says, well, I'm not, the reason why he's talking about how he speaks so much at the beginning is because he's trying to distance himself from these sort of performance-oriented public speakers who don't have anything to do with truth. So he's saying, no, I care more about truth than the way I speak. Then he has a crack at the sophists. Then he has a crack at the poets and the politicians, and he has all of these people who are all probably sitting in the audience.
Oh yeah.
And deciding on his fate, but he just has a go at all of them.
By the end of it, he's saying things like when he's imagining how wonderful it would be to die and to be talking with those people who've lived in the past. He's even able to say things like, imagine that I could be in the place where the real just people are, not just the ones pretending to be doing justice. In other words, the whole jury,
yes,
not the jury system, but all those individuals in front of him.
Yeah, exactly.
He's willing to sort of disparage
yeah.
in that way, and for good reason.
Yeah.
I don't think he's being just arrogantly provocative. Of course, the other great courtroom scene in ancient literature is the trial of Jesus, where he stands before Pontius Pilate, who wants only one thing, which is to find a way to get Jesus off the hook, because it's clear to him that this is an innocent man. And in a way that has some parallels, at least, to the trial of Socrates, Jesus himself escalates the situation, in this case not by being provocative, but he's being asked, just give me any, just say anything, just give me any excuse to let you off. And he refuses. He won't say a single word in his own defense. And again, he appeals to a higher court of justice, and entrusts himself so fully to that higher court that it is not a direct provocation, but you can see some parallels anyway between these two scenes. A total lack that the criminal proceedings are premised on the fact that it's really, really bad for you to be put to death. And neither Jesus nor Socrates sees that as something necessarily to be avoided at all costs.
So with Socrates, the thing that he almost begins his defense by talking about the oracle at Delphi, and he says, well, I'm only doing what the gods told me to do.
Noting that he's on trial partly for his atheistical ways.
Yes, that's right.
And his whole speech is a self-defense in one respect, and I think in one respect only, that he definitively proves that he is a pious, God-fearing man. Keep going.
No, I think you're right. And so, in a way, to answer the charge of his atheism, and if he in fact, the wording is clearer when he reads out the charges. So let's go over the charges. First, he's accused of committing injustice and being a busybody. He investigates things beneath the earth and in the heavens. In other words, he asks questions about the physical world and about nature. That seems to be a problem.
Weird criminal charge, though, isn't it?
I know, it is a weird criminal charge. He also makes the weaker argument the stronger. In other words, they're accusing him of being deceptive in his arguments. And then the other part of the charge really is this one about atheism, that he undermines the gods of the city.
Yeah, which means you're undermining public order.
That's right. His claim is that no, quite to the contrary. I revere this. I revere the laws of the city, and I revere the gods of the city. And let me give you some evidence. But the evidence is actually quite striking, because what he's actually appealing to is in the Athenian mind, the gods of the city and the laws of the city are all working toward the same telos. It's public order and the good of the polis. But Socrates differentiates this, and he says, no, I follow the gods, and what the gods are telling me to do. He doesn't think that that's in conflict with the interests of the city, but you can see that he's saying, well, over and against what I'm being accused of, I'm actually just following what the divine has told me to do, and that is to go and find out who is the wisest.
Yeah, it's amazing the multiple ways in which he appeals to supernatural agencies, particularly this extraordinary claim that throughout his life he has listened to a kind of inner divine prompting. Some God has come and prompted him, nudged him internally, and he has one of the ways he has learned to live is by responding to these subtle nudgings. It's a really fascinating. That is not something you would conclude about Socrates from reading the other
Yeah, that's right.
accounts of him in Plato's dialogues and so on.
Yeah.
But he presents himself as driven almost by a compulsive obedience to an inner prompting, which interestingly leads him. What does it prompt him to do? To question, to learn, to. So it's a close alignment between, say, faith and reason. It's not a specifically religious. To me, it's almost like a secular educational form of divine inspiration. But anyway, you can see in the larger context of his argument, he is proving that his whole life is shaped by by divine influence and by obedience to divine influence in ways that far surpasses the kind of, you could say, pedantic external religious considerations of his accusers. Paying lip service to the gods. And
Right.
And so on.
And that would be outward piety, but he's actually suggesting he's inwardly pious in his challenging of the status quo and in his pursuit of truth and justice. Justice often comes up, and of course this is a court of law, so justice is a regular theme. Let's talk about how he faces death a bit more, because in the final pages, he says things like, I'm just trying to find the pertinent texts. So particularly in the last pages, he basically says that death is good. He says, you see, it's likely that what has happened to me is a good thing, and that those of you who suppose death to be bad make an incorrect supposition. I've strong evidence of this, since there is no way my usual sign would have failed to oppose me. So that is this, like a kind of divine sign. If I weren't about to achieve something good. I'll just go on reading a little bit more. Let's bear this in mind, that the following is also a strong reason to hope that death may be something good. Being dead is one of two things: either the dead are nothing, so that's sort of sleep, as it were, they have no awareness, nothing whatsoever. Or else, as we're told, it's some sort of change, a migration of the soul from here to another place. And that would be he's imagining Hades, I think, or sort of a Hades-like place. And so then he says, and I'll stop in just a minute, but he does say this: I imagine that not just some private individual, but even the great king would actually. So I'll go back a bit more. If someone had to pick a night in which he slept so soundly that he didn't even have a dream, which is what you were just describing, that sort of, it's annihilating sleep. He says that everyone would pick that night to sleep, and he says death might be like that. But if it's a sort of journey, then he says I'll get to sit with Minos and all of these other great demigods and other people like Musaeus and Hesiod and Homer, Orpheus. And so he says, you too, gentlemen of the jury, should be of good hope in the face of death. Nothing bad can happen to a good man. To die now and escape my troubles was a better thing for me. So there's this real. It's not the same as Stoicism or Epicureanism, which we explored previously. He's not seeking to make the most of life now and love now, as we were looking at in the poets, but he's actually facing death with it's almost like a faith that it is better to die well and to die for a good reason than to avoid death because of cowardice or because of some other.
And the problem you can see when he says nothing bad can happen to a good man. If you avoid death through cowardice, you're not avoiding death. You're just postponing it, right? We all are going to die. That's the inevitable thing. What's the difference though? You're now in the act of trying to avoid it, you're going to change from being a good to a bad man, from being virtuous to being ruled by vice, the vice of cowardice. And you're going to die now as a bad man.
Yeah.
And then the question about what if death is a continuation of this life, it would take on a more sinister coloring. If you're not a just person, maybe you don't have such good things to look forward to in the next life. And this is key to Socrates' way of thinking. Any notion that you can avoid death has to be put out of your mind. It's a powerful delusion that all of us indulge in all the time
Yeah.
when we think we're avoiding death, but we're not.
Yeah.
The only thing under our control is the way we live now.
That's right.
In that respect, I think there is a certain kinship with Stoicism, with saying death is a certain thing. That's not one of the things you can control. What you can control is your inner disposition, the way you live now.
And I think there's also, and that naturally I think maps onto Christianity as well, which says that death is inevitable. And it also, while it rages against death in the sense that death is the enemy, death is not a bad thing for a Christian. And that how we live now, there's an urgency to how we live now in the face of death for a Christian as well, in a similar way. The pursuit of truth is the thing that Socrates sees as the highest good, the pursuit of the philosophical vocation and the pursuit of truth. And in the face of death, he would rather pursue that. He would rather continue to pursue that than to back away from it just so he can avoid death.
And you can see how this aligns with his respect for the laws of the city too, right? Because the thing that the city is founded on is truth.
Yep. That's right.
A right knowledge of justice, a truthful understanding of what human nature is and how we ought to live together. Because a good city, a good society, keeping in mind that city in ancient Greece means society, a social order which does take form in one particular place.
Yeah.
A good society is founded on truth. So when Socrates, he's not at any point actually opposing the justice system.
Yeah.
He's actually defending it. But in trying to think how to explain it, his loyalty to the higher truth on which this system of justice is founded, that higher loyalty means everything he does, even in allowing himself to be put to death, he is doing it for the sake of his city, for the sake of the laws, for the sake of
he's actually
justice.
A martyr for the city.
He's a martyr for the city. That's
how
right.
he's actually framed. He said, "I'm this gadfly. I'm here to provoke you. I'm here to trouble you so that you can realign yourself, so that you can think clearly. But now you're going to kill me for that. Well, I'm not going to stop doing it because it's the right thing to do. It's the best thing for the city."
Yeah.
Yeah.
The remarkable closing lines where he says, "Enough of this. It's time to finish. We must go.
Yeah.
Me to my death, and you to your lives. And only the gods know which of those is better."
Yeah.
An astounding way to end this.
Yeah, it is.
This proceeding, keeping in mind that what they are expecting is to let him off with something like a slap on the wrist after he has, because you get to defend yourself. Then you get, if you're found guilty, you still get to haggle over the penalty and to propose your own penalty. They're expecting him to pay a fine. For him to talk them out of that so thoroughly that in the last line, he says, "Time to go, me to my death, you to your lives." He's taken away any other options.
Yeah.
He's almost it's quite extraordinary to see the way he's reasoning. It's almost like playing chess, where you perfectly get yourself into checkmate.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, the only thing they can do is put Socrates to death.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary. Can I talk again about the character of this person?
Yeah, I think we should, because it's such a, like you said at the start, you can't help but be wrapped up in his vitality, in his the humanness of him.
This is one of the reasons why we've included Plato in this class. Although normally, if you go into a library, Plato would be found in the section called philosophy. This is great literature. Think of the incredibly lifelike way that Plato brings this character to life, without any descriptive passages at all. There are no descriptions saying in this work saying, Socrates had a stub nose and his clothing was looking frayed, he rubbed his eyes. There's no action passages where it said he paced back and forth with his hands behind his back. There is nothing except the human voice. And in all the history of Western literature, Plato is one of the great craftsmen of bringing the human voice to life through words on the page. His ability to capture the texture of the spoken voice, and more than that, to capture the very texture of Socrates' spirit.
Yeah.
Just by hearing Socrates talk, it's an extraordinary accomplishment.
Yeah.
Very much, again, I mean, it's different because the character of Socrates is very, very different from the depiction of Jesus in the Gospels. But again, if you think of the way the Gospels contain no physical descriptions of Jesus, or very, very, very few. He weeps sometimes. He walks from place to place. But nearly exclusively, the Gospels simply tell you what Jesus says, and somehow the character comes to life for you on the page as you read that. It's great storytelling, but to think that Plato is trying to entertain would be as wrong as it would be to think that the reason St. Matthew wrote his Gospel was to give you something enjoyable to do by the fireside on a cold evening. So can I mention another sort of point of comparison between the Gospels and the Apology of Socrates? I'm not saying they're all on the same level or anything like that, but another point of comparison, great literature often emerges out of a very, very serious commitment to telling the truth. Some of the greatest works of literature are not actually works that are intended or designed to entertain, but are designed to provoke you into searching for the truth. The Gospel of John, the Apology of Socrates, these are works written with such a moral seriousness, such a kind of metaphysical urgency. Life and death are at stake. Time and eternity hang in the balance. Everything depends on how the reader aligns themselves to the truth that is being declared here. And yet in the process of doing that, in the process of trying to tell you something urgently important, they create the most stunning literary. It is so enjoyable to read works like this. The characters are so incredibly lifelike. It is with such. You can go on and read the next work by Plato where he describes Socrates' death. Actually his death in his prison cell. And it leaves you feeling so bereft after.
It's a great. I actually think I like that more than the Apology.
Actually. But the effect it has on you by reading this, you actually become
really warm to him.
You become one of Socrates' friends.
You do.
Just as much as you can become one of Jesus's friends reading the Gospel of John. I shouldn't say just as much, but in a similar way, the Gospel of John is designed to make you into a friend of Jesus. You become Socrates' friend. He has a lasting effect on you. And the reason, I think, to my mind, the biggest single reason why Plato's writing has had such a lasting effect on Western philosophy is not actually the ideas, it's the character of Socrates himself, who emerges as such a compelling representation of what human nature is possible. Of what human nature is capable of. It's possible to live solely for the truth. And to be a really wonderful person while doing it. To be such a lovable person who lives only for truth. Not one of these annoying people who, you know what I mean? People who think they're living for truth, but actually they just want to take you down a peg. They just want to be nasty. They just want to argue. Socrates doesn't come across that way. He comes across as a wonderfully wholesome, flourishing person who lives for all the right things and for all the right reasons. And the example of Socrates shows me then that human life is capable of far more than I've really attained yet. So people, I think readers of Plato become disciples of Socrates before they become, let's say, Platonists. Members of a philosophical school. You feel like attaching yourself to this person. You feel that you've become his friend. That is great literature.
Oh, it is, and it is emulated and copied and imitated through it to this very day. The dialogical literary form in philosophy at least continues. And
certainly in literature. Think of the Sherlock Holmes stories,
exactly.
which are based on Plato's dialogues.
Yeah, that's right.
You get to see the great man, the genius of crime solving, Sherlock Holmes. You see him not directly. You never get a glimpse into his mind directly. You see him through the admiring eyes of his disciple, Watson.
Yes.
The whole model for that is Plato's way of showing you Socrates through the eyes of an admiring disciple. Just as the New Testament Gospels show you Jesus not directly. A gospel in which Jesus told you his own story would be an unthinkably different thing, right?
Yeah.
You glimpse this person always from a certain distance through the eyes of his most loyal, most admiring disciples. And so much of the world's best literature adopts that method. Sherlock Holmes is an easy example, but you see it everywhere.
The unit has explored this question of what it means to be human, and the humanness and vitality of Socrates is the perfect way to finish, because he is exemplary of what it means to be human in many ways, and he at least from what we're told, he seemed to be an exemplary human being. But across the unit, we've talked about big questions like where do we come from? So the cosmos, order in the cosmos or chaos. So who are we? What went wrong? Why is the universe the way it is? Is violence a necessary part of the human condition? Is death?
Are we really free?
Are we free? And then there's this question of life in the face of death. And all of these big questions which permeate Western literature and permeate the Western mind, these big questions are, I think it's fair to say, this unit has demonstrated how those questions are best explored in literature. It's difficult to explore. You can explore those questions in very helpful and interesting ways in other disciplines or in other categories of writing and other ways of thinking. But there's something about literature which gets at this question of the human condition that you just can't attain to in other forms of discourse, I don't think.
Can I suggest a reason why? Just thinking back to this, the way Plato brings Socrates to life in these stories, in these dialogues. There is something about the way literature can make a human being present. Socrates, the distilled, if there was something about Socrates that you could bottle up and keep, that's what the literature does, and you get to meet the essence of Socrates. Milton actually said this in the 17th century, that a great book is the lifeblood of a master spirit that's been literally, or not literally, but as it were, bottled up and kept and preserved so that future generations can still encounter what is most essential about that particular person. Literature, I think, is one of the most powerful tools, if not the most powerful tool ever discovered for making a human being present across time. Because literature can do that in a special way. Think of the great heroes in Greek and Roman epic. Think of Adam and Eve and Satan in Milton's epic. Think of the way characters come to life in the texts of Shakespeare. Think of a character like Don Quixote, who in a way is as memorable as Socrates, a completely lifelike fantasy character who you really get to meet as you read his story. It's precisely because literature can make the human spirit present in a unique way. That's why it is such a powerful tool for investigating these questions about what does it actually mean to be human? What is it like living in the world? What is the relationship between the freedom that I feel internally and the constraints and necessities and luck and fortune and everything that I experience externally? In other words, how do I relate to the rest of the cosmos? These fundamental questions about the human condition are best explored through literature, because there has never been, I think anyway, a better way. No one has come up yet with a better method for actually rendering a human spirit.
Yes.
As an object that you have right there in front of you, that you can investigate. Yes. and that you can think with this account of Socrates in Plato's Apology. You imagine almost like a holographic 3D image of Socrates coming up in such detail, in such vividness, that you can walk all around him and scrutinize him from all angles and inspect him thoroughly. You're able to thoroughly investigate the human by reading works of literature.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think that there's also this, the experience of reading literature there's something inexplicable about the way that we warm to the people that we read about. I mean, even if you think of something like Beowulf, where the characters aren't actually very deep in the writing itself, you don't find out that much about them. But then we're drawn to Beowulf for some reason, and it's because he's a human. Because the work brings out the humanness in him and brings out some element of the human spirit which we all aspire to admire, or we're reviled by, or whatever it might be. And it's the same with, I mean, that's just an example, probably because in a way it has a more obviously shallow depiction of the characters, but people still are drawn to these characters. People still are drawn to these works. Yeah. So it's actually that to me is strong evidence that there is something which literature does, which you can't do elsewhere.
Right back in the first week, we talked about Erich Auerbach's celebrated distinction between a biblical Hebrew type of literature, which is all about the inside.
Yeah.
There's no background. There's nothing external. It's about the interior psychological depth and mysteriousness of the human.
Yeah, Auerbach talks about things being veiled, like there's just this veil over everything.
Yeah. Versus the Homeric Greek style, where there's almost no interior.
Yeah.
This would be the Beowulf type. There's almost no interiority. Everything's external action. Yeah. And in both, and he argues that Western literature is kind of those are the raw materials, and different writers use elements of these two, of interiority and of external action.
Yeah.
Some books move so far in the direction of interiority that there is no external action at all. A book like Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground is an example of that.
Nothing happens.
Nothing happens except within
except
myself.
Inside,
Other books in the Homeric style have the action is completely exterior. Yeah. The novels of Hemingway might be an example where it's just people doing things and saying things, and you never get a glimpse of what they are.
And it's the stories of King Arthur's knights and so on, which are all sort of it's descriptions of what people are doing and saying, rather than.
In both these cases, different as they are, you see what they have in common. These are both tools for getting at the thing that we're really interested in, the human person.
Exactly.
And there is a question here: do we understand human beings best when we see them in their interior depths? Or do we understand human beings best when we see them acting?
Yeah.
And it maybe is false to think of that as a choice between one or the other. Presumably, these are both crucial elements. Right. When I see a human being acting, that does reveal to me the character of that person. That teaches me something about what it means to be human. But this is incomplete knowledge until I also see the human being from the inside.
Yeah.
And literature is a really unique tool for investigating the human being from the inside. Most, specifically poetry is able to plunge into the depths of the mind. We talked about the poetry of Donne, metaphysical poetry, where nothing happens on the outside. All the drama is the drama of the mind, the soul, the feelings. Because literature is able to move so nimbly between the external and the internal, this is why when I say it's like a 3D holographic image that emerges, it's more than that.
Yeah.
It would be like a 3D holographic image where you can also walk into it.
Yes.
And it's 3D from the inside.
Yeah, right.
That's what literature can do.
Yeah. I think that's a really great way to finish the unit, because I think we've circled back again on asking that question: what does it the big question is, what does it mean to be human? All of the things that we've been exploring are trying to get at that question. And in my opening lecture, I asked this question: how does Western literature distinguish itself in relation to those questions? And I think that Auerbach's observations are a helpful way to finish. So thanks for the discussion today.
Thank you.
Okay.